First one is a self-confident leader is clear on what they stand for. They've worked that out. So there's a sense of clarity on the kind of leader that they aspire to be, or the kind of leader that they are, and that is a subset of the kind of human being that they are. So there's an integration between the kind of leader that they are and the kind of person that they are. And so they're not trying to kind of disintegrate those two things. One is a subset of the other. So they're clear what they stand for in different emotional and relational situations or contexts. So if they are clear on who they are as a human being and then who they are as a leader, then from there they can imagine how that might apply to various different situations. Like, for example, when they're doing public speaking, when they're in a meeting, when they're facing maybe high risk situations. That is, it's important that they come across well, that they communicate well. When they are facing difficulty, when they're put on the spot, when people are challenging them, they've kind of worked out how they want to be, what kind of human being they want to bring into those particular situations. And moreover, they know that it's not so much about what they get from those situations. It's more about orienting their mind to what is right, and not just what appears to be right in this moment for one's, let's say, immediate emotional pleasure. Like doing well in a meeting because everybody's agreeing with you and it's all going well and everybody thinks you're great, is not what self-confident leaders are really after. What they're after is how they're showing up in line with who they are, how they're expressing their values, how they're showing up. They're less concerned about how others are seeing them in the moment. So, quite like what Rasmus talks about, what Rasmus Hogarth says about this. He talks about the idea of egoless self-confidence, that self-confidence arises from knowing one's ego and knowing how one's ego may interfere with a person being able to show up in a way that appears to be self-confident, or in a way that is self-confident, because it's the existence of the ego, and it's when the ego is feeling damaged that the ego will drive behaviors that are less than self-confident. So if you imagine in the limit whereby a person has, because you hear a lot of people say, "Oh, I don't have any ego invested in this." I hear this quite often. Well, just because a person says that doesn't really affect the probability of that actually being true too much. So when a person says that to me, I normally kind of just brush it off, because whether a person says that or not, I know whether a person has ego invested through the way that they're showing up. So, but if you imagine in the limit that there is genuinely no ego invested in something, then what would that individual therefore be concerned with? If he's not concerned with keeping his ego intact, his or her ego intact, then what are they concerned with? If you think about it. Well, what they're concerned with is doing the right thing. Well, what does that mean, doing the right thing? Well, it means doing the right thing in the context of what is right for the widest relevant system. Whether it could be me, sometimes maybe it could be me. Sometimes it's me and my team. Sometimes it's me and my team and the company at large. Sometimes it's the customers. It might be the staff. It might be the organization. It might be the ecosystem in which the organization sits, or it might be the world in which that ecosystem sits, or it might be the universe in which that world sits. So, and generally speaking, an individual that is showing up confidently is oriented to something bigger than just their own immediate emotional well-being, but more oriented to something which is bigger than just only that. And also taking that perspective in a longer time frame rather than just, when I say oriented to more than just one's immediate well-being. The word one in that is important. So more than one, something bigger, more than immediate, something longer term. And ego gets in the way of that because ego is concerned with one's immediate emotional well-being or emotional comfort and or discomfort. That's what ego is concerned with. Ego wants to keep itself whole now, and now. And doesn't even like to predict that, at some point in the future, something's going to hurt the ego. It creates a strong emotional reaction that drives non-self-confident behavior. There are biases and there are biases. Right? So there are biases that one may be aware of. And just because one is aware of one's bias doesn't mean that one doesn't express a bias. And so generally speaking, that if that bias is born often, so the existence of bias is often born of some kind of sense of threat that one may or may not be aware of. It's quite difficult with bias, of course, right? Because, you could argue that we're all biased, whether we have ego or whether we don't, we're still going to have bias, right? And but an aware leader, let's say a good leader, will be aware of the existence of bias. At least they will know that it is quite likely that a bias exists, including within them and within others. But what they will be challenging themselves to do at all times is to really understand the perspectives of others. To inquire about the perspectives of others. So if there's a disagreement, the leader will use question. They will inquire before they advocate. So they may go into that meeting thinking that they're pretty clear on what they want, and they're getting resistance from everybody else, but they're going to make sure that they fully understand the concerns of other people in the meeting and try to line that up with what I said earlier on, the, if you wish, goal to orient one's mind and actions towards that which is right, rather than that which just defends their own point of view in the moment. So there may or may not be a difference between what is actually right and what feels right, because actually the feeling is coming from defending your own point of view, which makes your ego feel good. So, an aware leader will continuously challenge that and ask oneself that question again. You might even ask the question directly, what is my ego saying about this? What are my own concerns? What are my own immediate concerns driving me to think and feel and do? And what would it be like if my concerns were oriented to the longest possible time frame and the widest possible system? What would be right in those situations? And when I say the longest possible time and the widest possible system, we've got to keep it relevant, right? So what is the longest possible relevant time frame? And what is the widest relevant system? The thing I would say about that is that generally the longest relevant time frame is longer than you first think. And the widest relevant system might be wider than you're first thinking about. So you need to challenge yourself to go deeper with those perspectives and see, the biggest, as you go out further and further, and as you go out further and further in terms of the size of the system and the length of time, then it is likely that more common factors, more commonality is beginning to emerge as you do that between different points of view. So it could be that your point of view is okay, your point of view is okay. They appear to be different, but when you look at it in a wider time frame, a wider system and a longer time frame, they may both actually achieve the right thing. So how do we integrate that? The best way, the best way to deal with bias really is to listen to the perspective, genuinely listen to the points of view of other people and where those points of view are coming from. So, my own personal view on that is that one should start with trusting oneself first. So one does have intuitions, but when I say start with trusting yourself, what I really mean by that is trust in your own process. Trust that if you can be clear on your bottom lines, be clear on your own values, be clear that those values, if skillfully determined, mean that you're going to show up compassionately with others around you, and act in a way that serves the bigger system in the wider time frame. And you can trust that, you need to be able to trust that if you do that, you're more likely to come to the right answer, right? So that's the first thing. Part of that, includes knowing that you can also trust your own boundaries to some degree, although one's boundaries need to be challenged. So what I mean by boundaries are this: it's like knowing your bottom lines and why you have them. Are your bottom lines, so what I mean by bottom line is the answer to the question, what am I prepared to do here? What am I prepared to tolerate here? What am I prepared to do in order to have what I would like to have? And what compromises might I want to make? Because I may have a very, very firm point of view. So quite often, I often say to leaders, for example, that you may be really determined around a particular point of view. You may really think that this is right. You may have looked at it systemically and it's still right. You may have looked at it longer term and it still looks right. But sometimes you have to decide what you're going to let other people be right about as well, even though you may in fact be right. Sometimes it can be good to allow to do what maybe you feel is not right and allow other people to do what they feel is right, because that kind of builds trust. But of course, you need to be able to trust that by doing that, you're not taking a material risk. So you're building trust, trust being, this person is really listening to me. They don't agree with me, but they're allowing me to do what I want to do because I think it's right. They don't think it's right, but they're letting me do what I think is right. That builds a lot of fellowship as a leader if you're able to do that. But what you need to be able to trust is that you're not taking a life-threatening business risk by doing that, right? So sometimes you need to trust yourself and the system that even if you give up some things that you believe are right and allow others to have their wins, to trust that in the long term, that actually builds systemic well-being within that system. Because you have a team that kind of knows that you're listening to them. And you're not only listening to them, you're also giving up on some of the things that you believe so that they can have some of the things that they believe. Again, as long as that doesn't speak to your own values, and as long as it doesn't speak to the organizational values, which doesn't violate those things, and as long as you're not taking an unnecessarily large business risk. I often say sometimes you need to go backwards in order to go forwards. Sometimes, right? When you're on a bus, you might have to do that sometimes. You ask yourself, well, why are we going that way? Where I'm going is over there, but that's where the road goes. That's why you're going that way, right? So if there are conflicts between individuals in the team, then a leader's intervention might be to revisit if you wish, the team contract. Look at the aspirations for why did this team exist? Encouraging the team to look beyond their own egos and look towards what would be the right thing to do if their minds were oriented to the longest possible relevant time frame and the widest possible relevant system, in line with hopefully the team contract. What I mean by the team contract is the team's assessment of their orientation towards the purpose of the team. Hopefully every team will be aligned with, what this team is actually doing in the world. Why are they together as a team? And what do they get out of being a team? Rather than just being a collection of individuals or a group, right? So once the individuals within that team are very aligned under the, if you wish, the collective shared purpose of the team, then the leader sometimes just needs to remind the team members of, what would you do now if you were fully aligned with our purpose? That makes sense. How would you think and feel about that if your behaviors and thoughts and actions and feelings were aligned with what you contracted with the rest of us as being the reason why we're here, and how we need to work with each other in order that we can move on that purpose? Because in terms of conflict between the leader and a team member, again, if the leader is orienting towards values-based leadership, leading through values, then they'll be able to manage that sort of conflict fairly elegantly. As long as they understand that, when I think about conflict in teams, I always say to leaders, what would you do now if you were being deliberately developmental? What would you do in this situation? If it wasn't about you, if your actions in this situation were not about discharging your somewhat negative emotion right now about the situation or about the person. So if you notice that, you go, oh, look at that. That's likely to drive unskillful, egoic behavior. How would I behave if I was oriented towards this individual's development? Because whatever has already happened. Can't stop, can't reverse it. It's happened. Yeah, we can make the best of it. But in order to make the best of it, you need everybody, especially if a mistake has been made and, something needs to be, if you wish, corrected or dealt with, some kind of error has been made, then you need everybody's tails up. You need everybody motivated and looking forward rather than looking backwards and say, oh my God, there's this mistake, there's this disagreement or whatever it is. Asking oneself, how do I make sure that from this moment to the next moment and then all the future moments, everybody is going to be at their best, resolving whatever problem or whatever conflict has arisen. And we don't do that very well, many leaders. It's we're often anxious or angry, and that, of course, when we're showing up in that way, we're creating an environment where an individual is not at their best right now. And especially if you've got problems, you need to be at your best to solve them. I think we've got to be careful with that one, especially today, right? We can't be too bold. So what I mean by that is, there is, on the Hogan assessment, there is this like leadership derailleur, and it's called bold. So what does bold mean? And it's one of the, I think there are 11 of them. And bold is one of them. So what does bold mean in that context? Well, bold means in that context, a leader who kind of forms a point of view on something and then will never let it go, despite the fact that maybe the market might have changed, or maybe everybody is basically saying, it's evident that maybe nobody else agrees with them, and yet they're absolutely sticking to it, despite all opposition. Now, it's difficult because there's so leaders do need to be fairly resilient and fairly determined, but they also need to be very adaptive and agile around listening to others' point of view and continuously seeking feedback. So what I often say is a great leader will continuously seek disruptive feedback, which is designed to shake their view on themselves and also on their view of the world that they're living in. Continuously seek it and be prepared to act upon any new information that comes up, which changes any of those views. So the world changes, and leaders that hold on to their view of the world are going to find themselves, are going to find the world moving away from them fairly quickly unless they can remain inquisitive, curious, communicative, research oriented, continuously looking for negative feedback that might disrupt their view of themselves or of the markets in which they operate. But at the same time, without being flighty or, I have leaders, my personal views and people that know me well will know that. And I always say to people, I will change my view as many times as is appropriate to do so. Because I've had some of my own people kind of complain about the fact that I often change my mind. And maybe I do too often change my mind, but I'd rather be that way than the other way. Coach can only help with anything to the extent that the individual who's being coached would like to be helped with that thing or supported with that thing. So that's the first thing. There needs to be a need. There needs to be an opening for coaching. And that opening could come from a variety of different sources. They may be getting into trouble because they're too fixed in their views, or maybe you get some leaders who are very, very bold and they can't change, or they don't like to change their views. And they feel threatened when other people are coming to them with disruptive feedback on their views or on themselves. They feel threatened by it. And then one day they realize, wow, this is actually about me. And then there's an opening for coaching. When situations like that occur, of course, the coach can then move into inquiring about the changes that are necessary. In what way? What are the goals that the client may wish to set? So quite often you'll be coaching. Coaches are coaching people who have received some kind of feedback that they need to be more nimble or more adaptive or more compassionate or more trusting. All of these things do come up. More self-confident, perhaps. Quite often you will be faced with a leader who is being told by others that they need to develop this thing called self-confidence, and they have no idea how to do it. So I feel that I think a coach is all about supporting an individual to learn through their own experience of what it's like when they're at their best, right? So a coach can support a person to live in that space where they're bringing their best into a situation. And sometimes they don't know what their best ought to look like. And the coach may be tempted to kind of tell them or to over-present information to them. Or the coach could encourage the individual to think about a model for their behavior. So what I mean by that is a model for their behavior is they may not have a peak experience within themselves around self-confidence, but they may be able to say something like, well, I wish I could show up more like she does in those situations. I'd love to be more like her. And then you can ask those questions. Okay, so you clarify that. So what is it like to be like her? What behavior would be being expressed in what context? When you say that you'd like to be like her, right? Clarify that. What is the specific behavior? In what specific context? At what specific time? In what particular place? What behavior is being expressed that you would like to be able to model? And then they'll say something. And then you might say, well, so then you can go in various different directions. You might say, okay, so what's happening now instead of that with you? Right? You can go there. And then you can say, okay, so what is it that you're thinking and feeling and caring about in that moment that causes you to be doing that instead? So then you're getting into the cognitive, emotional, behavioral antecedents of the existing behavior. And then you can support the person to go back to the desired behavior. What needs to change? What do you need to be caring about in the moment that you are able to bring the new behavior that you would like to be able to behave? That may be self-confident behavior. What needs to be in your mind in order that you can feel confident in that moment? so that you can express yourself confidently in that moment. What do you need to be thinking? What do you need to be feeling? And then what do you need to be doing? Okay, so you might get an answer to that. So this person that you would like to be, you'd like to model their way of being in that situation, what do you think they might be thinking about? What do you think they may be caring about? What are they not caring about that maybe you are caring about that is causing you to do this? Because everything that you do comes from what's in the mind. So what's in your mind at the moment that you're behaving that may be absent from the mind of this person that you would like to model? And what might be in their mind that is absent from yours? And how, and what practices can you do? What exercises can you do? What thinking can you do? What reflection can you do that can potentially install those things into your neural operating system? So the first one really is authenticity. A for authenticity. Authenticity really means that an authentic leader is a leader who knows. To be authentic, you need to know what you're being authentic to. Right. So there's a lot of stuff in this A for authenticity. And but the first part of it is being oriented to one's own internal compass. Authentic to the leader that they are or aspire to be, which hopefully, as I mentioned earlier, is a subset of who they are as a human being. Rather than being authentic to, because you hear a lot about authenticity, don't you? You hear about, I want to be authentic. Yeah, but does that mean that you just wear every sort of egoic emotion on your heart and express it just because you want to? Because that's what a lot of people think about authenticity as being just that. They feel emotions, so they have to express them, even if those emotions are coming from ego rather than from good long-term systemic thinking. So do you want that? Is that what you want? Do you want to be the kind of person who just expresses every short-term emotion and like weather system as it passes through and obscures what is really authentic for you? Or do you want to punch through that cloud and act in a way that is actually authentic to your longer-term aspirations and orientations? Who do you want to be? What do you really care about? So that's kind of A for authenticity. But so that's great, but we need to be agile and adaptive, which is kind of another A, agile and adaptive. So adaptive means that we need to realize, that maybe our view of what is right, or maybe even our view of what is authentic for us, might shift over time as we realize that it's not taking us to where we want to go. So where we want to go being either being genuinely happy. Sometimes I use the expression, are you able to lie in bed at night, every night, with a straight back, because you know that day you have done well. You have shown up in line with what is right. And you don't have a suspicion that maybe the way that you showed up today was all about you now, rather than about us then or later. And it doesn't matter what you get if you're always oriented to that. But sometimes we may need to continuously reflect on what that is, what is right in the longer term for more than us. We need to reflect on, how did we show up today? What did we do today that was actually authentic to what I now know is the right? How might I need to adapt? What do I need to be aware of? That's another A, aware. What do I need to be aware of? And how do I practice that awareness? How do I heighten my awareness? In particular, how can I heighten my awareness of what was happening with me as I was behaving during the day? What emotions was I running? How were those emotions impacting on me? What assumptions were I making? What assumptions were I making? Were I making? How might those assumptions be possible to be challenged? And what might happen if I were able to make different assumptions? Can I maintain awareness of the consequences of my actions on the system? Do I know that my thoughts, feelings, and actions are skillful relative to my authentic orientations. Confidence is not going to be an issue because it's hardly going to have a definite. It's not going to be about confidence. It's just going to be about your being. You're not even going to use the word. You're not even going to go around saying to yourself, "Oh, I'm feeling confident now." It's just going to be who you are. The more automatic all of this becomes, the less you think about it. It's just is. So the external person, you're going to come across as being extremely grounded and therefore extremely confident and undefended in the face of pressure or disagreement or criticism. You're going to be undefended. Change. You're going to be able to ride all of those waves or surf all of the waves that come to you elegantly. The leader of Marriott in Asia Pacific, and I love what he said. He's a mountain biker. He loves to do this kind of speed mountain biking thing. And he used to talk about the best way to be good at this is not try to control the bike. I love the expression that he used, and it's a great metaphor. And he said, allow the bike to dance under you as you're going over all these rocks and potholes. Let the bike dance, hold the handlebars somewhat loosely, sit up off the seat. Don't try to control it. Let it dance beneath you. And I love that. And I felt for me that immediately connected with, wow, this is what we need to do with life. We need to let life happen beneath us and dance with it rather than trying to grip it and control it. It doesn't work like that. And if one is able to do that, we won't be thinking about, that's self-confidence. No, we're just going to be being. Others are going to say, oh, wow, that guy's so confident. She's so calm. She's so grounded. But the person's not going to be saying that all the time. It's just going to be how they are. It needs to be, so that that circles back to trust. And about it, there's a knowing that trying to wing it, and many leaders do, trying to wing it when you actually don't know, ultimately doesn't get you where you want to go. If you're doing that in order to protect your ego, if you're doing that in order to look better with your people, then yeah, you might for the moment, you might for a while, but eventually you're going to get caught out. If you have a habit of winging it and pretending you know that which you don't know, then you're going to get caught out, and then your credibility is going to take a dive, and it's going to have a lot of negative impacts on your happiness and success. So in service of the thing of looking at the widest possible, longest possible time frame, widest possible system, if you were oriented to that, you're not going to try and wing it, because you're going to know that in the longest time frame, that is not the way to be trusted by other people. If one of your outcome goals is to be trusted, or even to be seen in a certain way as a trusted leader, capable leader, then you'd better know that part of that is saying that you don't know when you don't know. Very much part of that. You might learn some skills around doing that. Like, for example, you might say, great, you might learn some what I call gracefulness skill. The gracefulness skills, you ask me a question, I don't know the answers. Well, that's a fantastic question. Well done for thinking that up. I don't know. I don't know the answer to that one. I can tell you what's coming up for me right now as I think about that, but this is not yet evidence-based. I've kind of said that myself to people. Not yet evidence-based. It's coming up for me, and it doesn't necessarily mean it's true. You know what? I'm going to have to get back to you, but great question. That's a sort of a graceful way of getting out that, in my opinion, builds others' confidence in you. And actually, you feel good when you're doing that. So a lot of leaders, they don't realize how good they're going to feel when they're able to be graceful and just admit they don't know. It actually feels good to be able to say that. Why does it feel good? Because we feel good when we're in line with our authentic aspirations. We feel good because acting in service of those gives you a tick in the dopamine box. Don't try and wing it. Know that if you're looking at that wisdom matrix, short, long, me, us, winging it is right down here. It's about you now. It's about you avoiding immediate pain by admitting that you don't know an answer to something. Well, that's all about you right now. It's not about us in the longer term. It's about discharging your avoidance of experiencing a negative emotion. You could say, at the first level, you could say you have to be courageous to be confident. You need the courage to be confident. But seeing it that way can often undermine confidence. So maybe the better way to say that is you need to have the courage to behave in a way that is not familiar to you in the moment of choice. So it's not about not having fear. It's about feeling the fear, trusting that maybe the fear is driven by a story that is actually not true. You've been telling yourself that story for half a century, but actually it may not be true. And then having the courage to experiment with jettisoning that story, which will then liberate you to practice the behavior that correlates with your practice of confidence. So any change requires courage, right? Because it's unsafe. The mind says change is unsafe for reasons that we've discussed before. So yeah, so of course they'll line up. Advice for emerging leaders around this area is challenge. Well, there's a lot of it. I mean, right? Challenge your beliefs, challenge your assumptions. Be suspicious about all of the things that you've held to be true about how you need to behave in a certain way. You know, especially if it's in a domain of coaching interest, a domain where you believe that the way that you're showing up is somehow getting in the way of either your happiness or something that you want. But ultimately, it's always about your happiness, because even the things that we say we want, when we believe that we want those things, they can be proximal causes of our unhappiness. So challenge those things, you know, what you're telling yourself about what you really want. And then ask yourself, does what I want line up with the person that I want to be? If I was showing up in line with the human being that I would love to be, the leader that I would love to be, does that get me where I think I want to go? Does that get me to what I think I actually want? And if the answer is no, maybe it doesn't, then you're wanting the wrong things. You need to have, as you know, ways of showing up on the waypoints towards what you want. And sometimes the things that you want prevent you from showing up in the way that you would like to be. So you need to look at all of that. And that sounds a bit complicated, but you need to look at that. You need to keep everything lined up. You need to remain curious. Who was it that said, be curious? I think it was Steve Jobs. Well, it's so true. Be curious about everything, especially about you, yourself, especially about those things that are undermined, that you believe are undermining your sense of self-confidence. That's what we're talking about right now. You know, ask yourself the question, what is it that's undermining my feelings of confidence? You'll probably find that you're trying to control things that are uncontrollable about the outcomes of how you're showing up. Because actually all you need to do is to decide how you would love to show up and then make that happen again and again and again, and put the outcome out there. Don't have the outcome that you're looking for right in front of you. Try it further out and focus on how you're being rather than what you're getting. And then you'll be able to come across more gracefully, more elegantly, and you're more likely then to get those things that you want. Yeah, a lot of things. Reflect again and again on what brings you to your best. Reflect again and again on the trouble spots, you know, where you're not, where you're having emotional difficulties popping up, you know, things where you're getting frustrated or angry or anxious, and ask yourself, what's really at stake here? Actually, what is it that I'm caring about? Is it possible that I'm caring about something too much, and that caring about it so much is preventing me from being liberated to be the person that I would love to be?